and welcome to the Raw Rugby League podcast. I'm Meehall Wood, and today we are doing what really this podcast has been leading up to all along. Yes, with Magic Round looming, we're going deep on stats with one number that explains each of the 17 NRL teams. Now, to do that, I've got one of the best names in the stats game. Now, I've been trying to think of a good metaphor for this, so here's two. You can pick which one you prefer. It's either De Niro and Pacino in Heat in the coffee shop spreadsheets, or it is Livingston and Stanley deep in the jungle of data. Rugby League Eye Test, I presume.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mike. It's been a long time coming. We've been talking about doing this for a while, so I appreciate you giving me the time today.
Yes, because I have used this as a chance to dig all of my spreadsheets out, which I normally wait till about Magic Round to do it. So, because I feel like you can get a good sample size. And here we go. So what we're going to do, I am going to set up a little game for you in which we're going to go through every team, but I'm not going to tell you the order. I'm just going to throw teams out there. There is an order, but you don't know it. And at the end, you can try and guess what it is, and you definitely won't. So we've split them between us, all 17 teams. I think I got 9, you got 8. Yeah. And number 1 is the Brisbane Broncos, which is one of mine. I got 2 stats here because the Brisbane Broncos are good, right? But they're good in a very specific way. So they are, stat number 1 for the day, they're the only side who have a line break conversion rate of lower than 100, which basically means that they have more tries than they have line breaks, which shouldn't exist. But the Broncos do have it, and they're the only team. Canberra are the second. And to put this into context, the Bulldogs are 155%, which means that they basically create line breaks 2-1 to the ones they actually score. So why does this happen? Well, they are incredibly good at kicking, and incredibly good at completing stuff. And I just think that's such an interesting sort of insight into the way that we all think of them as this brilliant attacking team, but they're actually just really, really efficient. Like Reece Walsh, Adam Reynolds, and Ezra Mam, really, really efficient at scoring points. Would you have looked at them and said that was something that might happen?
I think maybe not initially, but when you look at the numbers and you talk about it, absolutely, like that makes perfect sense. I mean, you've also got the fact that they create a lot of errors as well. They don't actually convert a lot of the chances that they create too. So there's probably a lot of tries and line breaks that are being lost because Reece Walsh just thrown a pass out the back or someone's fumbled it. But that's the sort of thing with the way they play that they should be playing that way, because their ability in attack is excellent, and you don't want to be stifling with people with that sort of creative ability.
So, and the other thing, I'm just going to throw this in there for a later point because I know you're a Paramount fan, but they also have the second highest hit-up percentage. And there's a wider point we'll get to on this because there's one of my other ones down the line does sort of refer to this. But there's I know you've written recently about this, but there's a real link between how many hit-ups you take and how wide you play, which sounds a bit counterintuitive. Paramount are very much an exception to this because they just take loads of hit-ups for the sake of it. But if you look at the teams that have the most hit-ups, they tend to be also the most expansive, like Cronulla and Manly and the Broncos. Is that, maybe it's worth going into what you've done in terms of just as a primer on how wide teams are playing this year, because that's something that we've seen across the league.
Yeah, I sort of noticed it. I originally started looking at it because the obvious reason was for the games at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas for round 1 were being played on a narrower and shorter field. So I was thought, well, the idea was probably that teams would concentrate through the middle because there's less space on the edges, but it wasn't actually the case. And we saw, I think it might have been the Manly game where there was more action going down the right-hand side. And for the first couple of weeks of the season, there was a lot of seemed to be early shifts, especially to the right. That's sort of dialed back a little bit over the past couple of rounds, but still this year we're seeing predominantly more play the balls on the right-hand side of the field, right-hand edge of the field, so sort of tram tracks and out, than we were last year, a little bit less in the middle. So, yeah, teams are starting to play a little bit wider.
And we're going to go from the sublime to the ridiculous here because we're going from the Broncos to South Sydney. Who is one of yours?
That was one of mine. Was it? I don't remember putting it down. That's fine. So South. So one of the. So what I'm going to say about South. So if we look at meters per run conceded, so just on average, how many meters is a team conceding per run? So South have the second worst meters conceded per run in the competition. The only team that is worse than them is the Dragons. And interestingly enough, it's about the same as Parramatta. So, which is sort of, I feel like there's a lot of similarities between the issues that South and Parramatta are having with sort of older middle forwards who are probably not as laterally mobile as they used to be and having trouble kicking up with the speed in a lot of the early shifts of rugby league at the moment. So, yeah, South's one of the worst teams at conceding meters per run. So not just looking at total meters. So we're trying to normalise things by possession and say meters per run. They're giving up one of the worst in the competition. I'm sure you probably agree. That's an easy one to spot when you watch the games.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't have the numbers because I left you to these stats, but their pre-contact meters, as people who read the Raw will know, is real bad. Which is pre-contact meters is how we actually mentioned this in our podcast about Souths a couple of weeks ago, but their line speed basically pre-contact meters is it's exactly what it sounds like. How many meters you make before you tackle somebody, aka line speed, and it is poor, very bad.
Yeah, you're spoiling one of my numbers later. I'm not spoiling it, but I was going to get into that one of the numbers.
Oh well, don't let me ruin it then.
No, it's fine. We'll wait till we get to that particular team because it's pretty obvious or pretty apparent. Again, that's another issue.
Yeah, we can move to the next on the list, which is, from the sublime to the ridiculous, the greatest football team on earth is the Manly Sea Eagles. Now, we've talked about how expansive rugby league is in 2024. Manly Sea Eagles are ahead of the curve here because almost all of these stats that I could put, looking through, you build your spreadsheets and then you go, I wonder who are the outliers. Manly Sea Eagles are the outliers on everything. They are playing a style of football that no one else is playing. For both better and for worse, because they score a lot of points, but they concede a lot of points. I saw one good one. This isn't my stat, but Ruben Garrick is the new Morgan Harper because Ruben Garrick is missing tackles or causing line breaks at the rate of Morgan Harper, except he's not because Morgan Harper still remains the champion of people run straight past him and Brian Kelly, God love them, ex-Manly players. But it's just whoever plays in that particular position for Manly just forgets how to tackle. Or forgets where to stand, actually, because they don't so much miss tackles, just don't make them. But I think what's interesting for Manly is that they are the shiftiest shifters around. Now, there is a stat that you can get, which is how many shifts a team made, as in how many long shifts. Manly have got 32 a game, which is a lot. The fewest is Parramatta, because Parramatta just like to take offloads. It's not even close how much more Manly do it. And they're actually kind of good at it because they do it to both sides. So to foreshadow what will come later, not everybody does that. They also have a very interesting stat, it's counterintuitive to that, which is there's one I like to track called the assisted try percentage. How many of their tries have assists, which kind of tries to work out which teams are creating the most of their good stuff and how much is luck, how much is just guys running over, sustainable points, right? And I can't work out with Manly on this. So I guess I'll throw it to you to see what you think of it, because they've got the words live attack written in massive letters on the side of their gym in Brookie. And if you watch the Manly Way YouTube documentary, Stephen Hales, who runs their attack, talks about live attack. You can hear him talk about it in a bit that I would suspect is probably not meant to have been broadcast. But what it means is that when they transition the ball, somebody drops it, they are immediately attacking straight afterwards. They're not messing around. And you see, off the top of my head, you've got, Coola's had a couple of interceptions. Saab's had an interception. That one, was it Talau who went the length against Penrith? The game-changing moment. As soon as the ball hits the deck, Manly are going for it. Straight away, they'll play straight off the deck. Because they've got so much speed. And I wonder, is that something that you... I just generally want your thoughts on the Manly Sea Eagles and their sort of very strange approach to all attack all the time.
Yeah, it's somewhat along the lines of what you're talking about, and I watched that Manly Way documentaries as well, and I've noticed a few of those things. But the speed that they've got, that's their strength, and so it makes sense to be using it as much as they do. I saw some articles with Anthony Seibold talking pre-season about how he wants to unlock his centres, and he's been doing a lot of work with union coaches, and given his history in England, that's a very obvious way to go. Spreading that ball wide, getting it to the guys like Kula and Garrick and Saab, getting it to them early, getting them early wide ball, trying to catch teams off guard, as you said, live attack, trying to get it as early as possible, or basically all the time. Yeah, that makes sense for the way they play. And I think you mentioned, so they had the lowest assisted try percentage. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, with the players they've got, you've got Tom Trbojevic. So that makes sense that they've got players who don't necessarily need to be assisted to get into positions to score. I mean, obviously you've got that helps, but they've also got players who can get through the line without being put into it.
Turbo, and I think, I mean, I would have to go and do the data on it, like incident by incident, but I would imagine Olakoatu would rank.
Yeah, he was the other one I was going to think of. Yeah,
carrying.
I mean, that right edge is lethal when they get the ball and they get in the right position.
Yeah, there was a good Olakoatu one. I cannot remember it. I'm trying to think. It'll come back to me what the great Olakoatu stat was, but he is like ridiculous. Post contact years, like just grabbing somebody and walking them with him is something that he's exceptional at, like on an individual basis. Now, one of your great subjects already this year is next up, and that is the Canterbury Bulldogs.
Yes. So this was, I think, was this one of the spoilers I was going to talk about? Yes, it was. So the Canterbury Bulldogs have the lowest pre-contact meters per run allowed this season. So that is even better than Penrith, who are notorious for their line speed and their defensive prowess over the last 4 or 5 years. But they beat Penrith as well by about 30 centimetres shorter per run pre-contact. So that Dogs forward pack as well, it's not the highest quality forward pack in the competition. They've got guys who have incredible attitude to defence and they play out of their skin. But if you look at their forward pack compared to most of the other packs in the league, they're probably missing one quality middle. And I mean, you can compare that to, say, the Eels or the Cowboys. They've got much bigger packs with bigger names, better reputations, but they're not putting anywhere near the same sort of effort defensively as the Dogs are, not showing the same sort of attitude. So yeah, the Dogs are probably the best line speed in the competition at the moment. Lowest pre-contact meters allowed per run.
It's something that when you watch a game, you notice when someone's bad at it, but you don't always notice when they're good at it.
Exactly.
When it's 30 centimeters per run, it's quite difficult to watch unless you watch over a real long period. I mean, that's why stats are so good, because they'll tell you things that you can't always see with the eye test, if you will. But do you think there's something in that about the size of their forwards? Because this was a big thing before, and I've seen a couple of people mention it, that it's kind of the opposite of when Fitzgibbon first came into Cronulla, they didn't really have any real big guys, and then you suddenly saw how many push reports they were running in attack, and you thought, they've done that on purpose. Do you think that's maybe what Serraldo said, like, I'd rather have fast guys than big guys?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it also allows them to be a bit more flexible with where they put guys on the field. And towards the back end of games, it probably means that those guys aren't going to tire as much as some of the bigger guys. So they have the ability to cover some of those lateral gaps quicker than a larger forward pack would be. And again, Parramatta and North Queensland probably good examples there. So I think, that as much as that recruiting system of getting a bunch of utilities and bringing them in and trying to plug some holes didn't make a lot of sense. And maybe with the ball, it still probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But defensively, I think it's resulted in them being one of the better defensive teams in the competition this year.
Next up, right now, I don't think anybody has written very much about this team this year because they haven't done anything interesting. They're the most boring team. Not boring to watch, they're actually all right. I think they're all right to watch. But next on the list is the Newcastle Knights. Now, this is one of mine, and I really had to struggle to find a way in which Newcastle were interesting. So I'm not going to waste our next one, actually, which is also one of mine, but there used to be a stat that they were interesting for because they were so bad at it, which was defensive kicking, but they're not. Yeah. A team has taken that title. So I'm going to go for their assisted line break percentage, which is a bit different to their assisted try percentage. But this is a team that does not put people through holes. And it's interesting, not so much because they don't do it, but because last year they were unbelievable at it. If you think of the right shape that they ran last year to Dom Young, you had Kalen Ponga passing it to Dom Young, and now he just doesn't pass it to him. Obviously he's injured now, but previously he was just he would just run through the hole. So they had worked out, and this, it's not a positive or a negative necessarily, but they were playing a really sort of qualitative attacking style, which was either Dom Young is faster, Kalen Ponga is more elusive, Tyson Frizzell runs a really good line, and they've actually worked it out a few times on short balls to forwards as well this year. We've seen Leo Thompson has scored, and who scored recently? Adam Elliott, yeah. He's had a few, and they're doing very well at spotting players up in the line, which means that you basically don't. Yeah, you don't. They're going through rather than round, which is the opposite of the way that they played last year. The worry with that is obviously Kalen Ponga is out. We've had a few games of not seeing him, in which they've been all right, actually, but they haven't played the best opposition. And you wonder what happens when Kalen Ponga isn't there doing magical things 3 times a game. What happens when that's David Armstrong or Will Price or somebody else? Because that is a... when you play like this and your best players get injured, it tends to go wrong pretty quickly. But yeah, that is Newcastle. Now, I'm actually looking at my big ranking here. I've got, I think, 3 of mine in a row. So I'm going to break it up and I'm going to say, give me the next one on the list that isn't mine, which is your beloved Parramatta Eels.
So
how long do you want? Do you want 20 minutes on Parramatta or?
No, I was struggling to think of like what number I would talk about, because just everything they're doing this year is just diabolically bad, and there's not anything. It's very hard to find a positive. So the one I've set on is one that I talked about quite a lot in the post that I put on my website a few weeks ago, was their net meters per run. So looking at the average meters they gain per run and the average meters they concede per run. So the Eels have the worst average meters per run in the competition, and they also have the third worst meters conceded per run. So if you combine those together, they allow nearly 1 more meter per run than they gain. So, which is crazy. So over the course of a set, they're giving up an extra 5 meters to their opponents. And that's a team that you and I have talked about this before, that they need to win that possession battle to be successful, because they don't generally make a lot of meters. They give up a lot of meters, but if they can kick the ball long enough, they'll generally roll up enough possession and push through the middle enough that they'll usually be successful. But we're seeing them not get enough ball lately. They've got old forwards who, again, a little bit slower laterally, and they're struggling to defend those gaps, and they're not generating anywhere near enough meters. So yeah, that's my stat. I mean, and also part of that is also that line speed that we're talking about. So this is the spoiler that I was talking about before. So their pre-contact meters, they're by far the worst in the NRL, and they're even worse than Souths. And we talked about how bad Souths were a few weeks ago, and I listened to that podcast you did with Oscar and Matt, which was fantastic. And you brought it up there, and it's something I'd noticed as well. So yeah, their line speed is just not, it's terrible. And that's contributing to the fact that they don't make enough meters and they give up too many meters, and they're just behind from the get-go.
Do you think? No, I noticed this first last year, right? I think a lot of people noticed how many meters they were conceding. It became like a meme of checking their average set distance battle, because they would continually. It wasn't so much that they would lose it; it was just that an average game might be 35 plays 35, and a Parramatta game would be 50 plays 50. Especially if Parramatta played Manly, it would be like basketball, either end of the field.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there's games this year, the games against the Cowboys, twice against Manly already, where like that has worked out to quite a good game, and they've actually won 2 out of those 3 games. But you feel like if that was played out over a 25-game season, it wouldn't work against anybody who could defend. Like if you could keep them at bay for any length of time, you would just, like the Dolphins did basically, where they would just tire themselves out and you would win you'd run over them in the second half.
Yeah, it's a war of attrition, and there's something else that was in the post I put up. Like you could spot the minute where they just fell off a cliff, and it wasn't just in the Dolphins game; it's been in other games this season as well. That when they get about 10 minutes into the second half, and that they don't compete anymore, and the meters per run for their opponents actually goes up from that point, which is bizarre. No other team in the competition really allows more meters per run as the game progresses. It generally drops as teams fatigue. The fatigue usually happens on both sides, probably at a different rate, but it usually goes down. But Parramatta gives more meters up as the game goes on, which is just bizarre. And they've got a pack that's basically all going to be 30 by the end of the season. Joe Offengower will be 30 next year. Their forward pack isn't designed for rugby league in 2024, and they've had a premiership window a few years ago. They've really leaned into it, and the amount that leaned into it has now come at their detriment.
I mean, I'd say that's an improvement, because as I mentioned in about every second Brad Arthur press conference last year, he didn't make any subs, so they would be great for half an hour, then undo everything in the last 10 minutes whilst forwards sort of drunkenly grasped at thin air. Sorry,
Elliot Richardson used to do Rugby League Monthly and now does his own video podcast as well, and looks after One-Eyed Eel. We always have a joke every year about the Darwin game about how little the 17th man for the Eels will be used. We always try and pick what minute will it be. Will it be like the 73rd or the 74th minute that Brad Arthur suddenly decides, I've got a fresh man on the bench, I can put him on in this game where it's 30 degrees with 90% humidity and middles, are struggling to get back in the line.
Yeah, well, I think we can watch this space for Elliot's views on Parramatta, because I will be expecting him if we do an episode of Parramatta in the near future, he'll be getting about half an hour's rant.
He's probably a little bit more, coming off the back fence a bit more than I am. I'm sort of resigned to more sort of apathy, and I've seen enough now to sort of, they haven't lost me, but I'm a bit more apathetic to their performances at the moment. I wanted to see some change, whereas I can imagine he's got plenty of ammunition he wants to unload.
Yeah, ground down by the process is the feeling I'm getting. Much like Parramatta don't do, because they try to get with it. Maybe Elliot's just waiting until the 65th minute.
Possibly.
Next on the list now, there's been a bit of a mess of it because we counted the teams wrong, so we both have a Gold Coast Titans stat.
Yep.
And I'm going to go first on mine because I think this is, because I've just mentioned it with Newcastle, because the Titans have taken the mantle of the worst kickers in the league. Now, I couldn't believe this stat, right, to the point where I've had to go and look it up. You get your stat provider that you like, and we have different ones, which is why you'll notice we have some different stats. But I was like, this can't be true. This can't be true. 100% is true. I've checked it 2 different places. The Titans have 3% of their kicks find the floor. 3. For context, Manly, who are at the top, have 25. Which is all right. Daily Cherry Evans is pretty good, but 3 is rubbish, absolutely rubbish. And I couldn't work out how this is possible. So the way you work out, you have long kicks finding space as a stat's pretty widely available, and then you can work out from total kicks, and then sort of subdivides into grubbers, bombs, crossfields, blah, blah, blah. And you can basically work out attacking and defensive kicking, like when are they kicking for distance and when are they not. So if you put that in, you end up with Mitchell Moses is very good at long kicking, so is Adam Reynolds. But the Titans are terrible at it, absolutely terrible. And I would say that there's probably an element of they haven't had a consistent 7, like Tanner Boyd's been in and out, and Kieran Foran's done a bit of it, and then which doesn't help. And I don't think if Kieran Foran is your 7, he's a really good 6 and not that good a 7. So I was amazed, and I was sort of looking through the other bits of the data, and what I think they're doing, which is Jackson Hastings and Sean Johnson, God love them, this is their trick, just sending up aimless midfield bombs all the time. Like their numbers for how many bombs they take are much, much higher than everybody else's, and certainly not commensurate with how much field position they get. And it looks like they're getting to about the 40 or the 50 metre zone and going, just throw it up in the air. Just hope for the best.
If you're the Gold Coast Titans and you probably don't have as talented a backline as the rest of the competition, it probably is the best probabilistic way of scoring a try is putting up a kick and hoping for a result, because they're probably not going to see the same returns setting up for a deep left or right shift at the end of the set.
Yeah, I think there's also they just hemorrhage meters as well. So what's the point? Box teams into the corner if you know that that's not what you're good at. You might as well play the lottery at the end of everything. I found actually Newcastle used to be the worst for this, and I've spoken to Jackson Hastings about it in the past. But he was doing it when the game that they were playing a couple of weeks ago. Who did they play? Maybe the Roosters. Yeah, it was the Roosters. And for about half the second half, and they needed to win, I was like, why are you just bombing it up in the air to Tedesco from 50 metres out? You either kick to the corner or don't. Piss or get off the pot, with your boot. And I think if you're the Warriors, for example, who are also pretty low at finding the floor, it doesn't matter because you're trying to cage the opponent in the end. Whereas the Titans and the Knights are just not doing that. They're not kicking deep enough to cage anybody. And they're not kicking for the floor, and they're not kicking. They must be going for a compete on it, but it's clearly not working for the Titans. But another good, DC. I've written in my notes, DCE is God, and Daily Cherry Evans is incredible at this. I think Manly are very good because Croker does it out of dummy half, and I would be interested to see because Reynolds and Burton are very, very high, and I reckon a lot of the Bulldogs numbers are also Reid Marnie. I haven't actually didn't have time to do the individuals on that, but it's such a underrated skill. You wait until we get to the Panthers before you find out why it's so underrated. But next up, You have the Cronulla Sharks.
I have the Cronulla Sharks. Okay,
Well,
so
I have the Cronulla Sharks.
Do you? Okay.
No. But you had another Titans. You had another Titans.
I have another Titans. I've actually got a Sharks one as well that I wasn't going to use, but I will.
All right, you got Titans, Sharks, and I got Sharks.
I got Titans, Sharks. So my Titans one is actually was hoping the Titans would come up early because what I want to do is break your record on bringing up how useless completion rates are as a statistic. So my number was actually that the Titans set completion is 82%, which is the highest in the NRL. So, and as we just talked about, the performances haven't been great. They've been better lately, but just another example of why completion rate doesn't really mean a lot. The reason I bring that up is that they've got the lowest number of total sets per game in the competition. So yeah, they're completing really well, but they're averaging only 37.8 per game. Manly at first, they average about 41, and only Para and Souths have sort of around the same sort of number of total sets as the Titans. So they're not getting the ball, but when they do get it, they're completing it really well. But that's sort of spells out they're playing sort of a low risk brand of football. And as you mentioned, with that kicking stat, probably ties into that too, that they're just trying to get the end of their set, put up a contested kick 30 or 40 meters out and hoping for the best. And it doesn't seem to really be paying off.
I would love to do, and I wish I thought of this about 3 hours ago because I would have done it, but there's a stat I came up with last year called the set loop, which is the speed at which teams get through sets. And the Dragons were terrible at it. They were the slowest. He was trying to work out who the slowest team in the league was. And now you've mentioned that, I'm going to go out and work out if the Titans are as slow as I think they are, because I think that's it. Basically, if you play if you look, there's average about, it goes up sort of 1 or 2 a year in each direction, but you get about 40 sets a half. So if you're only doing 40 sets a game, per side, 40 sets a half.
Yeah. So funny you mentioned that as well. So they're the only team other than Souths to not have a game where they've had more than 40 total sets. So as you mentioned there, you get basically 40 a half, 80 for a game. So every other team in the competition has had at least one game with 40. I think the Bulldogs even had one game where they had 50. The Titans haven't had a single game above 40 total sets, and Souths actually haven't even had a game with 40. So again, it sort of highlights that they're not getting the ball enough to be competitive, especially with the talent that they've got.
Yeah, not to sink the slipper further into Souths, but this used to be the area in which Souths were really good. Like they rattled through their work because they were doing what Manly are doing now. They were constantly trying to move the ball, like get down, get up, get up, get down, forwards, quick play the ball, spread it. And now it's just like, the Titans are kind of always like that, though. Unfortunately, yes. The problem is you can play like that if you can also defend, but they can't defend.
Oh, absolutely. That's the problem. They don't. And so, they're trying to Des is trying to find some, I guess, creative ways to get around that. But as you mentioned, that kick distance is probably not where it needs to be, and they need to probably pin them down a little bit further and trap them in the corners more than they are doing at the moment.
Yeah. Well, because you brought up completion rates before me, that is actually my Sharks start. So I'll go for my Sharks one next because Cronulla Sharks completion rate is 80%, right? Which if you look at Paul Kent is what every NRL team aims for, because Paul Kent doesn't have statistics. You'd be surprised to hear. But that's not the interesting bit. And 80% is like right in the middle of the pack. The interesting bit is that they are 5% up on last year. So the whole league has gone up 1.76%. But Cronulla are the biggest movers in terms of getting to the end of their sets, which, there isn't intrinsically anything wrong with completing your sets. It's a good thing. You score a try.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So it's more that when you complete like the Titans do because you don't do anything, or like Barrett's Bulldogs did because you're not doing anything with the ball, it's completely pointless. Completely pointless. That should be the title. But the Sharks are managing to complete higher whilst, that was their problem basically before, is that I think the floor that I've worked out is about 73%, after which it becomes very difficult to win a game. But if you can hit 75, you'll probably go all right, even though anything higher than 80 doesn't really help you. 75 to 80 is kind of the sweet spot. So going from 75 to 280 while still scoring points, that's a much better efficiency for a footy team. And that's basically why Cronulla, I think, have got better, because they used to have to defend way more. I don't know if they've got better at defending, but they just do less of it than they used to.
Yeah, agreed. I was going to talk, you mentioned that sort of 75 to 80 sweet spot. When I was looking at the Titans, I noticed Brisbane's completion rate this year is about 77%. And, given all the errors that they do create, that's to me, that's probably a little bit higher than I expected. But it's about that risk reward. There's a sort of a tipping point where you start completing too much. You're not taking the risks to generate points. So, and the Roosters are a great example of that. And you've talked about it before. I've talked about it before on the site. The one winning their titles with incredibly low completion rates because they knew that they had the players who could create points and push the ball and push passes in situations where most teams wouldn't. And yeah, it would create an error every now and again. But when it came off, they ended up generating a lot of points, and they knew also they had the defense to back it. Their goal line defense has historically been really good, and some of that might be because they also push the limits of holding teams down in the tackle and rushing up a little bit early off the line. The discipline they tend to push that a little bit harder than some teams, but it gave them the results. So yeah, there's that. You're right. There's that point where being too conservative ends up costing you points rather than giving you points.
Yeah, and if you can complete it 100%, I've actually been at a game where the Warriors beat the Dragons at Cogra and they completed 100% for the whole game. It
was like 43 or 43 sets or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it wasn't a very good game. I have to say, it was a dreadful game of football. But that was the Nathan Brown Warriors as well. But it wasn't scintillating stuff, but they did win, so you got to give them that. But it's the moving dial. And if you've gone from 75 to 80 and you're still attacking, like, brilliant. This is like another result. Yeah. Unbelievable. Because if you imagine that across a Cronulla would be above 40 sets, they'd be sort of 41, 42, I would imagine. And that's probably 2 sets that they're not having to defend that the other team is having to defend, like across the course of the game. So that's kind of, that's the difference. I would imagine their defense is just that they do less of it. You mentioned the Roosters. Now, just because you mentioned there, you've got the Roosters.
I do. Before we get, I was going to get onto that. I have that one more Sharks stat that I brought up.
Well, whilst you find that, I didn't get the Roosters. You've got the Roosters, so I'm hoping that yours isn't how many set restarts they give away, because that would have been mine.
No. I've stayed away from that. I've tried to as much as I built my site on banging on about set restarts, I've tried to stop to limit the amount of talking on them. I think this week, given the hysteria in the media about penalty counts and restarts and things, I've tried to veer away from that as well.
Yeah, I would have said it as a positive. Like, the Roosters are the experts at giving away, not getting punished for cheating, basically cheating.
Yeah, well, that's what Penrith and Melbourne were doing. When the peak set restart era was Penrith and Melbourne constantly pushing the boundaries because they knew that they could defend endless sets of 6, but they knew they could defend consecutive sets of 6 with their team. So, and they push the boundary. So yeah, what's worse, getting a ball kicked down the field 30 meters from a penalty, or maybe giving up an extra couple of tackles? I think I did the numbers on it at one point. It was like, if you gave away a set restart, you gave away an extra 2.6 play the balls, which to me is like, why wouldn't you be doing that almost every time?
Yeah, like it's the every boxer trains for 15 rounds. No, they'll only do 12. Kind of like, I reckon the Roosters just do that constantly and go, I'm sure people don't need us to tell you, go and watch the Roosters. Every time someone gets a 20-meter tap, a scrum 20 meters out from the line, you're going to get a set restart in the first 2 tackles. It always happens. Yes. And they should just do what they did in Super League, start sending people off, but they don't. So,
before we go to the Roosters, my Shark stat was they are the only team, and I'm pretty sure this is right. I'm looking at my numbers. The only team this year that has not conceded a try from their opponent's own half. So someone scoring a try inside their own half against the Sharks. They're the only team that hasn't had that occur this year.
That's a belter. I would have said if you'd have asked me to guess, I think I would have guessed the Warriors, and now I'm thinking that Manly scored from in their own half against them. But I would have said the Warriors would have been the best at that, like keeping the other team at the other end of the field. Yeah.
So it's only in terms of keeping at the other end of the field, and we'll get to the Warriors later, and that's actually the case. But in as conceding a try, the Sharks are the only one who've done that. The Warriors actually conceded 5, it looks like. So the Sharks.
How many of them? I think 3 of them were against Manly in fairness. But I just say maybe the Sharks haven't played the Seagulls yet, so we're going to shred them through endless, pointless first tackle shifts.
So I'm going to move on to the Roosters now. So my stat is it's going to be based on the expected points metric I have on the site. So
here we go. The real stats.
I was going to say, Yes, I wasn't sure where I
This
was
is
going
what
to
we
come in.
have
So
for.
I was, for anyone who's new to the eye test and hasn't read any of my work before, on the site I have a metric called expected points, and that's probably a misnomer, and I'll tell you why in a second. But basically, it looks at from the location of a play the ball based on the tackle number as well. What is the probability of a try being scored from that position? And then for each play the ball, you sum those numbers up, and at the end of the game, you get a points value based on all those instances. So in that regard, it's probably more of a accumulated field position value than the number of points they have scored. But the easiest way of thinking of it is if an average team had this field position on these tackles, this is the amount of points they should probably score. And there's some issues with that in that teams like, say, the Tigers, where they're not that great at executing inside 20, end up spending more time inside 20 because they don't get across the line, so their expected points are quite high. And then you get a team, say, like Cronulla, who's been really good at scoring tries from further down the field or not needing as many tackles inside 20 to generate points. They ended up with lower expected points totals. So it can be in isolation a bit jarring at first. If you see a game where, say, someone's won 40-10 and the expected point scores are quite even, but what that means is that just each team has used their field position in different ways. So the winning team has obviously been a little bit more efficient, scoring from low expected point value positions, and the other team the losing team scoring 10 points might have not had might have had a lot of opportunities to score, but couldn't get across the line. So that's the sort of quick version of it.
Yeah, the example I always think is the high expected point value is scored by New Brown from scoring from 50 centimeters out,
Yep.
pushing over, and then
Yes.
the low expected point value is do you remember the try that I think Tobojevic scored in the end, but where Ruben Garrick fielded a kick on his own dead ball line on maybe the final round of the 2021 season? It was like peak 2021 football. And everyone went, Manly, they've just scored the try of the century, and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, yeah, because the Cowboys that they were playing are about to collapse. And
yeah, or if you want an example from the weekend, the try Charlie Staines scored against the Dogs would be a very low expected point try, coming, I think, about 25 metres out on one of the earlier tackles, I think. So that would be a low value one. But as you mentioned, Mike, tackle in front of the sticks, 10 metres out on fourth or fifth tackle would be very high points. So given that explainer on expected points, my stat from the Roosters is that they are the most efficient team in the league this year. They have scoring at 69% above their expected point total. So that means that they are scoring 69% more points than an average team would given the same field position. And to me, that's really interesting as well, because if I talk about where teams are scoring tries from, which I mentioned with the Sharks before, the Roosters are actually only ninth if you look at the average distance for a try that they've scored. So they're not necessarily scoring points from a long way out. What they're doing is when they get that good field position, they're not taking a lot of time to score points.
so it's like the good ball efficiency is the...
Yeah. Like they're not wasting time, yeah.
There's an interesting trend that I thought we would see more of this year. And I think the best example is Wigan in the World Cup Challenge, right? Where in the World Cup Challenge, Wigan basically played incredibly conservatively for 60 metres and then basically tried to score in every play. Like once they got into anything approximating good field position, they were trying to score. Like, and actually, I would love. I don't know if you can get the expected points on World Cup Challenge games, but they would have been very low because they only had a limited amount of play in Penrith 10. But on every tackle that they had, they went for it and they scored 3 tries. Did they score a try? I feel
well,
it's in the paper now, Penrith. It's in the paper now.
Yeah.
But you think of they scored one on the right, which was Bevan French set up with an incredible left to right pass, and it was just like on the third tackle, I think, and he just went, "Fuck it, we're going for it now," because how often are we going to be down there? And I thought that was going to be. I saw Manly try it late last year. The Broncos tried it a lot. The teams who had done Parramatta tried it a lot against Penrith as well. Like, if you're going to do the hard yards to get into that end of the field, start chucking it. Like, and I think the Roosters,
exactly.
If you look at who they have as well, particularly when Sam Walker's playing well, like the more Sam Walker does that, like that's what he's good at. Like he's a guy who'll take him. I think him and Reece Walsh are probably the highest sort of error. Scott Drinkwater a little bit. He's not quite as good as them. Like will throw it. Don't care if they make errors. Like get down this end of the field.
Yeah.
Throw shit at the wall and see what sticks.
Exactly, and it's almost cruel that they added Dom Young this year. It's like they didn't need another amazing attacking play. I mean, I can't remember who he threw the ball back in, but that inside flick that he sort of no look pass that he threw in for someone to score a try, it might have been Swiley.
At the Broncos game.
Like it just feels it's almost unfair just to have another attacking weapon like that on their team.
Well, he was also, I can remember this from last year, like the line break efficiency for Newcastle, because as they'll tell you, you can't teach speed and you certainly can't teach size, but the way that he is able to turn what is a half gap for everybody else into a full gap for him because he's so fast. Yeah. Like you get it a little bit with Saab as well, but Saab's not as strong. No. Saab's is, and the difference I think that those two specifically have is like incredible composure. So if you look at, don't want to pull out Tolu Kula because he's, a similarly very fast player, but often gets into the break and then, gets tackled. Whereas the amount of times that Saab and Young then convert that break into a point, either for themselves or somebody else, is pretty exceptional. I think Young's, Trent Robinson, as we mentioned before, does not care about completion rates, and he will have looked at those errors that have kept Dom Young at Newcastle and gone, don't care. That guy's going to create me. This is the man who, the first stat I ever came up with, individual stat, as I call it the Kenny Dowell Index, which was how many, it's like a plus minus number on wingers and how many tries do they score compared to how many they are directly responsible for because they can't tackle. And that was, Kenny Dowell is what he was the top try scorer in the history of the Roosters, right? Until Tupu overtook. He was one of the top ones ever, and there was a very good reason why Trent Robinson kept picking him, even though he was a complete liability for years, was because he did enough of the good stuff.
Yeah, of course, and you can have those sort of players in a team like the Roosters, where you've got the other players who can compensate for that. It's where you end up stacking the same types of players in a team that becomes exponentially terrible.
Yeah, when you put Brian Kelly next to Philip Sami, next to
just before we move on for the Roosters, so I was talking like as an example of how efficient they are. So looking at the number of play the balls they've had inside 20, they've got roughly the same number of play the balls inside 20 as the Tigers this season, whereas the Tigers have scored 119 points and the Roosters have scored 258. So again, just highlighting how efficient they are, even when from getting that possession close to the line, whereas the Tigers have just struggled. I mean, as much as they've improved under Benji initially, they're sort of regressing to the mean a little bit more now, probably. They're still incredibly inefficient inside 20.
Well, the Tigers are next on the list, and they're on my list. So let's jump straight to them because I had one for Manly, which is I realised I thought Manly had the highest pass per run ratio in the league. And then I was looking through it and actually don't. They have the joint highest with the West Tigers. So the West Tigers are a good example of this more expansive style of football and sort of when it works and when it doesn't work, because the West Tigers are as expansive as Manly. Like, I would actually say they are more expansive than Manly because Manly play two off the ruck, as in they'll play Jake Tavorovich into another forward. So their pass per run ratio goes up because they're not, when teams are taking one out hit ups, Manly are taking, it's still a one out hit up, but it's happening one wider, which is another sort of weird thing that they're trying to do at the moment, which I think is kind of working. If you've got Nathan Brown and Jake Tavorovich, then you can play like that. Whereas the Tigers aren't. The Tigers are doing regular hit ups and then just playing side to side. So there's two stats that I kind of wanted to combine, which is they've got this incredible pass per run ratio, which is 1.36, which is, it's not even like there's them and Manly and then a gap to everybody else. Then they are again, Manly, the shiftiest shifters around. The Tigers are the most imbalanced shifters. So they're not. That's coming up. They are, but they have changed the most in which side they shift to. So they used to be really dominant to the right, and now they're really dominant to the left. So they basically have gone throw the ball to Justin Olam all the time,
which makes sense given the rest of the back line.
Yeah, so they've become very predictable in terms of where the ball's going, which is kind of early stage Bulldogs when they got Adokar and Burton in the same team. They would just throw the ball that way and not throw it to Jaden Knockenball for reasons that are obvious. But the actual stat is that they have the longest time to make a break. So it takes the Tigers on average 11 sets to make a line break, which is, I think the average for the league is 8.6, which is it's all right. And then the Cowboys, actually, the Dolphins are 6.5. So they're pretty efficient when they get the ball and doing something with it. And I think the Finns is probably a bit, I would expect that. I think that's a bit of an outlier because of who they've played. And that game against Parramatta, where they ran up about 11 line breaks. But like in a regular game, I think they're a little bit they're not that much like that. But the Cowboys, definitely, they're playing like all attack all the time. Just as an aside on the Tigers, Asu Kapoa's tackle efficiency is 16%. And he's made attempted quite a lot of tackles, which is.
I was going to say that. How many games has he? How many? I'm trying to think how many games he's played.
I think he's made 18 tackles, but that's only 16% of the 1/6 attempted. So,
but that's for where he's playing though. That's a reasonably high number, like on the field, because.
No, 16, 1/6.
Yeah, 16. But
Has he been playing on the wing or has he been playing the second row? I thought he'd been playing the back row.
He's playing second row. Has he been playing second row?
Well, maybe I'm being unfair. He's got the lowest of anyone to make sample size in the whole league is Asu Kapoa. God love him. Can't tackle. But there's some really good howlers.
He's been playing off the bench. He's been playing off the bench, so that's fine. I understand. That makes sense now.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do, and this will get a run later, is to, as the season goes on, work out who are the last person to do something. So Jake Trbojevic, how many tackles? Jake Trbojevic took until round 23 one year to break a tackle. I used to look at that with hookers, as in which dummy half, how many touches of the ball did it take for them to create an error. I'm trying to remember. There was someone who got to nearly 1,000, I think, at one point. Nick Meaney was unbelievable for that. When he was playing fullback, Nick Meaney made no errors, zero.
But I'm talking for dummy halves as well, because they're touching the ball so many times a game. I'm trying to remember who it was. I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Tom Starling, possibly. I don't remember. Anyway.
It wasn't Damien Cook, because he'll have thrown 6 forward passes. No. Okay, next on the list, speaking of the Dolphins, is the Dolphins, which is one of yours.
Yes. So I've actually got sort of a mix of them, but a mix of stats. But there's one that's probably a quick one we can talk about, and there's a couple other ones. So the first one is that the Dolphins have the longest average try length, which is at 32 meters. So they're scoring the longest range tries this year. And I think, as you mentioned, some of that is weighted by the game against Parramatta, where they just seem to score from halfway on every time they touch the ball. But I did look into it, and it's not just from that game. They've been scoring some long range tries. Which is also interesting considering how little Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow has been playing. I thought he would be one of the recipients of a lot of those tries, and they've also had Herbie Farnworth out. So, given their massive sheet of injuries at the moment, shout out to a friend of the site, Brian, NRL Physio, they're scoring a lot of long-range tries still, even without some of their better players. So that's the first part of it. The second part is they're the only team this year who have fewer than 80% of their total run meters coming from their starting 13. So they get 79% from their starters and 21% from the bench. So they're the only team below 80%, which I also thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, that speaks to. We had Brian on the podcast last week on talking about the Dolphins, and one of the things that is noticed about the Dolphins is how conservatively they played, and yet. I just quoted how many line breaks they make, and you just quoted how far they score out from, which doesn't really chime, but it does show how they are playing incredibly conservatively up to a point, and then willing to go for it, which is like they're playing sort of high completions and expansive at the same time, which is basically the NRL in 2024, and the Dolphins are really killing it at it. Like their willingness to get to the 60-meter line, then go for it, is pretty impressive, and I think probably the bench stuff plays into it, because they're one of the few teams who's regularly picking only forwards on the bench. Like there's not really a utility. There's not, Jeremy Marshall King tends to play 80 minutes. Like they're literally just going straight through forwards all the time, which is probably why they're getting so many meters out of it. Yeah,
and they've got Josh Kerr coming off the bench, who's an eye test favourite, and is quite good in some of my more advanced stats. So I have one called which is run rate or run percentage. So it's a adjusted runs per minute by possession. So he's about 17% this year, and that's 1% above Toff Sipley, his second place. So he's running the ball quite a lot of time, quite often per minute by that metric. And he's also something I had on the site. He's the straightest runner in the NRL. So at about 14 degrees is his average degree of run. So if anyone ever asks you the straightest runner in the NRL is at the moment, it's Josh Kerr. He's picked up a few tries this year. So, they get some really good contributions from their bench. And as you just mentioned, they use them quite a lot as well.
Yeah, I think you could probably throw in the opposite of Josh Kerr in terms of attacking efficiency. He's probably Ray Stone in terms of defensive efficiency as well, like coming on. And he's one of my favourite categories of player, and I say this as a Jake Trbojevic super fan, the specialist defender. Cam McInnes, the guys who literally just come on and tackle everything that moves and then go off again, or injector if it just goes, just don't go off, just keep doing it.
They've got Max Plath as well. I mean, Max Plath's another one who's very quickly becoming one of my favorites. Just that sort of style player again is the type of player I like watching, and that's one of the reasons why I started doing a lot of the metrics I do, is because I wanted to check what was how do you evaluate a middle forward, because they don't play a lot of minutes, they don't score a lot of tries, they're not doing the flashy things that make a lot of noise, but they come on, they especially guys off the bench, they play short minutes, they run a lot, they make a lot of tackles, and they go off. Like, how do you judge who's good at that? So that's part of the reason why I made some metrics, looking at sort of how often they do it per minute, and then adjust it for how many times how many play the balls are in a match.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I feel like I don't want to get the wrong Eisenhuth, but I came up with a stat a couple of years ago that was like involvement rate.
Yeah, it would be Matt Eisenhuth. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and Matt Eisenhuth, I think it was Matt and not Tom. Yeah, who was like
Tom would play too many minutes for that to be high, whereas Matt would come on and do it. Yeah. And I mean, the kings of these metrics for me were Christian Welsh, who was just unbelievable in it up until about 2020. When he started playing longer minutes, and former Eel Daniel Alvaro, who's one of my favorites, even though he was not one of the better NRL players that the Eels ever had. But he would always come on, and he would always do a lot. It might not be what he would do would be good, but he would always come on and do a lot of activity.
Yeah, I actually I think I might have read about the Alvaro complex on your site and gone, what would be if you only counted good runs? And good tackles. So if you came up with another, and I think the winner on that was Luke Thompson. Luke Thompson made a lot of good runs, a lot of the time. I feel like maybe this is my Pommy bias, but I feel like he'll go down as a missed opportunity because he wasn't on the field long enough, either through suspension or injury. But like when he was there, he tended to come out of it pretty well. Yeah,
agreed.
So, right, wait. Next,
just before we move on the Dolphins, their defense is a lot better this year. I think they're averaging about 4 to 5 points fewer conceded per game, which again, given the players they're missing, is a pretty good result. Anyway, they're pretty firmly in the top 4 at the moment. Like they look like they could end up as a top 8 team, which again, I'm not sure how many people would have had them that far up the ladder this season.
Yeah, I think as we mentioned last week on the Dolphins episode, like the fact that their draw is incredibly soft, and I think that's can they keep it up against better teams? But
absolutely. I mean, I'd say Katoa is probably like I can't put into words how much I'm impressed by him this season. So I've got a player contribution rating. So I look at statistics that correlate well with winning games and positive and negative margins. And he would, up until last week, he was the second highest rated player under that metric in the competition, only behind Jerome Hughes. And to think that he's only 20 and he's already playing this well and making such an impact in some of these games, it's got an incredibly bright future there, and hopefully the Finns can hang on to him.
Yeah, and while we're discussing individual metrics that we've made up ourselves, I came up with one last year called creativity value, which is like just taking, it was basically like line break assists, line breaks, kick try assists. So try assists don't exist in my world because outcome bias. But like this was all more like how much could you isolate of what that player had done without other people intervening. There was a bit of supports in there, Cody Nicarimo was unbelievable. He was like the superstar of this data set. Was like he basically said that when he got the ball, him and Luke Brooks were basically like, if you gave these guys more ball, they would do a lot more with it. Tyrell Sloan as well, like just sort of isolating who was being super creative and was often let down by the fact that the other person dropped the ball over the line. Lachlan Elias also did very well.
I think that's a good point you made about try assists as well, as that sort of, every try sort of ends up with a try assist, whether or not it was actually a try assist or not. So I think there's probably a little bit too much attribution to some try assists. I think there's definitely players who are creating scores for other people, but sometimes it's just you made a putt, you caught the ball and passed it, and that was your try assist. So I understand why you would downweight those.
I know people in these people love tales of my footy career, but I once had 5 try assists in a game playing for Amsterdam Cobras. One of which was an amazing try assist. One was a Harbour Bridge pass which was dropped by someone, and I was raging about it. Didn't get my try assist. Didn't even get a line break assist. But one of them was passing the ball to someone on my own 10 who then ran the entire length of the field, and it made me think, that goes down in the book as the same as the Harbour Bridge pass that wasn't called.
Exactly. Exactly, yeah.
Some guy spilled over the line, which was a great
Probably
pass
not
I'll ever
worth
throw.
the same. Yeah.
Yeah. One of them was the greatest pass I'll ever throw, and the other one was me passing the ball first receiver, somebody ran through the entire team. Anyway, which was, for International Rugby Train Spotters, Gold Boot 2020, Joran Schoenemaker, because the Netherlands are the only team to play in the national game that year, and he was very good. Right, next on my list, after that brief journey through my footy career, is the Melbourne Storm. Now,
that's one of yours, isn't it?
That is one of mine, and it is not a surprise. But there is a surprising side, because it tells us something about rugby league in 2024. That's my theory. Yep. So Melbourne have, for many years, been the dummy half run meter champions, by which I mean Harry Grant loves a run. Of
course.
However, so here's an interesting little thing I found. They take 7% of all of their runs from dummy half, right? So the league average is 4%. So Melbourne nearly double the league average. However, they're only 6% of all their meters. So they actually underperform if you take it as a 1-for-1, right? Whereas if there was a team that I could suggest you do it the other way around, who only do 6% of their runs from dummy half, but make 7% of their meters, they overperform. It is the Sydney Roosters with former Melbourne Storm dummy half, Brandon Smith. But yeah, there's an interesting little bit there about how much is done by coaches and how much is done by players, because the Roosters didn't really care about that previously, but when they got a guy who was good at it, they've really leaned into it. And so even though the entire rest of the league has diminished over several years in how much they care about the dummy half running, which everybody kind of thought would be something that happened to the Six again, that hasn't really happened, and maybe that's your point. But so Melbourne have kept doing it because they got a guy who's good at it, and fair play to them for it. Interestingly, on that, Manly and the Panthers, so to reiterate, Melbourne are getting 7% of their runs are dummy half runs. Manly and Panthers are 1.8 and 1.9. So there is no way to skin a cat on this, because Manly and the Panthers are two of the Panthers are the best team in the league, and they're 1.9, which is Mitch Kenny just pass it off the floor, mate, and tackle. And Manly have gone, clearly our hierarchy here is Tabojevic, Brooks, Cherry Evans, Lockie Croker. You just pass the ball off the deck and tackle. So yeah, different ways to do it. Hit me up with a Brandon Smith.
Yeah, so about Brandon Smith. So there's another metric I have on my site, which is expected run meters. So again, similar to expected points, I looked at the average run meters from a position on the field based on tackle number as well, by a forward or a back, because theoretically there would be different. I'd love to go down into individual positions because your halves don't really run the ball much. So grouping them in with centers and wingers isn't necessarily fair, but so it gives you the expected run meters from any position on the field. And so therefore you can look at what players actually ended up with and what the difference is. So the top, I can't remember who's in 3 and 4, but the top 2 players this year, number 1 is Isaac Cargo from Panthers, which if you watch those games makes perfect sense. He makes more meters than expected. Second place is Matt Timoko from the Raiders. Again, a powerhouse runner who constantly is making way more meters than he should be in the same situation. And I think is either 4th or 5th, which is Brandon Smith. And that's really unusual. Again, you mentioned dummy halves don't necessarily run the ball a lot. So it's incredibly rare for not only dummy half to be running the ball, but also making a lot of meters from it. Because generally when they're coming out of dummy half, they're probably moving a little bit more of an angle, trying to create some gaps in the line. So he seems to be much more straightforward and just picking it up and going straight away. So yeah, his expected run meters is I think 4th or 5th in the competition this season.
I wonder how much of that is when I was doing the numbers on this, I sort of came up with a little metric of working out how often they go compared to how successful it is.
Yeah.
And I think there's someone like Harry Grant, for example, who he's just going to do it all the time because that's what he's good at. And you wouldn't, if you're Craig Bellamy, you would never tell him not to do that because he's the best at it. And then someone like Brandon Smith, who I think is becoming a bit more go when you see it, rather than he would have been, at Melbourne, he would have been given exactly the same instructions as Harry Grant. And now I think he's been a bit more judicious, which probably means that he's doing it better, than he was before.
So one of the things I did, and I haven't got it in front of me, and I probably should have, is one of the numbers I had was the percentage of their runs above expected. So it wasn't only how many more meters did they make above average. Was it what was the percentage of their runs where it was above expected? So how often they were creating a good quality run. And I don't have it in front of me, but I have a feeling that Smith was incredibly high in that. So, I mean, you think of someone like Jason Taumalolo would be someone who's historically really good at that, in that when he runs, he beats the expected run meters almost every time. Same with Timoko was like that last season. Spencer Leniu as well. So those sort of players. I think Smith was like that this season, but I just don't have the numbers in front of me.
Yeah, well, you've so you can go for two of the favourites here, because you've mentioned Matt Timoko there from the Raiders, and you've mentioned Jason Taumalolo, who I will give you the next two on the list. I've got the Raiders, then the Cowboys, so you can go.
Yep. So I will go with the Raiders first, which I can do relatively quickly. So I think we touched on this before. So the Raiders keep 63%. Raiders opponents have 63% of their play the balls inside their own half. So the Raiders are second in the competition, only behind the Warriors at 65%. So incredibly good at keeping opponents down their end of the field and not giving them up good field position, which is, I mean, for a young team, and they've got inexperienced halves as well, they're keeping their opponents where they want them to be. And that's probably had a part in them overperforming expectations this year. I don't think a lot of people had them sitting inside the 8 with a 5-4 record after 9 rounds.
And on that note, I know that we're short for time, so right, we're going to bat straight into the Cowboys, because I know that's one of yours as well.
Yeah. So I mean, so I think the Raiders doing really well this year. They're playing very good, simple football that's allowing them to succeed. So the Cowboys. So this is the opposite end of what we talked about with the Roosters before, where we talked about how many points they were scoring over the expected point value. So if we look at the Cowboys and how many points they're conceding 40% more points than an average team would given the same field position. And that's the third worst in the NRL. They're also the third worst in average points conceded as well. So they're not, their commitment to defense, and I talked about this on the side as well, is atrocious. Maybe it's too heavy of a word, but it's clearly not very good. So the average, the field position, if you look at the value of their field position by expected points, they give up roughly the same amount of field position as the Bulldogs do this year, but then they concede 10 more points per game than the Dogs do. And again, that's why I was sort of touching on the quality of the perceived quality of the Cowboys forward pack before. That they give up the same field position as the Dogs, but they're giving up 10 more points per game with that quality lineup. It's just a point talking about how much defense is commitment, attitude, and effort as well. And the Cowboys just don't seem to be showing it this season.
They do, however, have done something which I have long advocated for. I advocated actually for the Roosters to do with Jared Hargreaves and Spencer Leniu over time, swap one for the other. That they have actually brought Jason Taumalolo is now one of the elite bench forwards.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, he has to be physically, but yes, absolutely.
But like his ability to transition from a long minute long effectiveness forward when he was younger to a very effective short minute forward when he's older should be, that is one of the few sort of bright spots. Because I think, looking at it on meters per run, he is still an absolute killing machine. Yeah,
I think Jared Hargreaves has mentioned there. I think with a lot of his discipline issues, that it gets lost in the fact that in short stints he is still incredibly effective. Even and he's been in the league so long, it's again a testament to him that he's been able to adapt to that.
Yeah, I thought what they would do was basically eventually him and Leniu would swap places, and Leniu would be the longer minute and he would be the short minute, and they would have the same effectiveness. So maybe we'll see that, because Leniu's obviously been out for the whole season so far. Moving on
I've got one more for the Cowboys just before we finish off. So again, just highlighting how terrible they are defensively. So there's only the worst team in the competition for giving up tries inside their own 20 would be South Sydney. Makes sense. Second worst team is the Cowboys. So they don't give up a lot of long range tries, but when you get them back on defending their own line, that's when the points start to leak. So they're relatively good as long as we're in the middle of the field. But if you get them back trying to defend their own line, that's where a lot of those points come from.
They dreamt of a team of Scott Drinkwater's and they got one.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, right. We're going to batter through because my next one's the Dragons, and that is very easy to talk about because the Dragons are the most.
I'm glad I didn't get them.
Yeah, but that was actually really hard to find a good one. But then when I saw it, I was like, yes, here we go. They are the most one-side dominant team in the NRL, which they have been. They are the. I used to refer to them to their tactical plan as give it to Dozer. I'd be like, just throw the ball away and I don't know if he does something. But now you can throw in give it to Dozer and maybe Zach Lomax, because Zach Lomax is classic misunderstanding of stats, which you'll get to in a minute with the Panthers. But easy to go, well, he's done all this. It was like, yeah, because they keep throwing him the ball over and over and over again.
That's why a lot of the stats I put together, I try and do possession adjustments on them, because you get a team like the Panthers who have maybe 3 or 4 average sets per game more than another team. So they've got 20 play the balls more than another team to generate stats. So obviously Panthers players are going to have higher numbers than someone from the Dragons or the Tigers or whatever. So you're absolutely right. You have more opportunities to do something. You've got more opportunities to create statistics for it. So yeah.
Hold that thought in your head, because I've got the Panthers coming up, and that is weighing heavily. But before we get to the Panthers, let's go to second last team on the list is the Warriors, which is one of your...
Yeah, so your Dragons one has actually led into that. So the Warriors have the highest percentage of tries scored through the middle of the field at 41%. They also have the lowest percentage of tries scored on the left-hand side at 17%, and that is equal with the Dragons. And they're the only 2 teams that have a side of the field, either left or right, under 20%. So that's pretty telling statistic, especially for the Warriors, about how, and we both wrote about this week, how they've become very predictable in attack. That that they're going down the right-hand side. That it's going to start with Adam Fanua-Blake, and they're going to try and shift it out through to Dallin Matani-Zelezniak. But they're not getting across the line. So the Warriors get really great field position. Their defense is excellent. They don't allow a lot of points, but they're not converting the points, the possession that they have. And I think a lot of it's just become so predictable that left-hand side is almost non-existent. It'd be interesting to see them possibly swap out CNK and Roger occasionally on some of their shifts to the right, see if that would improve things. But yeah, they've just become very predictable.
So I've isolated this not so much on a stats level as a tactical level, but I noticed the Dragons did it to them? Somebody who they've played and lost to recently, which is actually quite a few teams, but they basically just posted the way that their one-in defender, the defensive centre, just stood slightly outside of Tuivasa-Sheck. And said, mate, you love a run back into the middle every single time. And so Marcelo Montoya's catching a cold, and that brilliant shift they have to the right, which aims at the corner post, they just can't do it on the other side. So they invariably go that way, and guess what? It comes back in because Tuivasa-Sheck he goes, oh, there's somebody there, I'll go for a run. And he's actually really good at running. Like his run, he meets for and stuff like that is brilliant. But it's all going back inside and moving away from the left-hand side.
Yeah, and they had even bigger trouble with it on the weekend with the conditions in Newcastle. It just wasn't conducive to that right-hand shift. And I mean, they should have won that game, and there was a lot of instances where they could have. But I think, they've got is it the Roosters this weekend? I think they've got quite a big challenge on their hands.
Good job that people won't hear this after that game's gone out when they've won 40-0.
Exactly.
That's what you need stats for predictive modelling. Right. The last one on the list is one of mine, and here we go with the hottest take of the day, because I know if you read the Roy, you've read this article. Dylan Edwards, fraud. Dylan Edwards is fraud. No, I thought this would be a good way to talk about your location data and my incident-based data, because I've done a bit on who should play fullback for New South Wales, and it does... A lot of people, let's call them rule dog bitchy, would like to have you believe that Dylan Edwards is really good because he takes lots of run meters. But of course, if you get lots of runs, you'll get lots of run meters, as Chance Nickel-Class that also has. However, if you play for the Penrith Panthers, which I guess he also works for them, a lot of those run meters might be quite uncontested because you play behind a team that gives you lots of space to run into. So I've worked out that Tom Savojevic, for example, way better, makes more runs, makes better runs. I'll have to find my actual articles. I stupidly have not written this down. But both Tom Savojevic and James Tedesco are better yardage players when you take out the fact that Dylan Edwards gets loads of free meters because he plays for a team that forces teams to kick from a long distance. So I'm trying to remember the exact number off the top of my head, but basically the pre-contact meters, if you take out kick return meters from what Dylan Edwards does, and then you factor in how often that Tom Savojevic is catching the ball in the full and not getting any kick return meters, he absolutely monsters him in difficult meters, essentially. Yeah,
in terms of the New South Wales fullback, I'm going to defer from that because I don't like getting the state of origin conversations. I mean, I think they'll pick Tedesco anyway, which is that was whatever we think.
That was just the jumping off point that made me go and look up.
Yeah, it's just it's irrelevant. I'm trying to find I did look at one point on percentage of run meters that came from kick returns. And Dylan Edwards wasn't high. It wasn't.
Would you like it? Because I think I've got it right in front of me.
Yeah, I did have it somewhere because it was to do with my expected run meters as well. I mean, I know Dylan Edwards was high, but he did also have a lot of traditional run meters as well, so it wasn't definitely pointed at. But you're right in that the incidence of him having those runs is much higher than another team because Penrith is so good and they don't concede points. So when a team is finishing their set, they're kicking the ball back to them. So he does get a lot of uncontested. And they're also, mate, if you've got a choice of who you're going to kick it to, you're not going to kick it to Brian Toe. Taruva gets more of the attacking high kicks because of the size difference with whoever he's usually matched up against. So it makes sense that they go down the middle of the field and they give it to Dylan Edwards.
Yeah, so I've got it in terms of if you take his runs without kick returns, he's worse than Trbojevic, and he is way worse than Tedesco. Like Tedesco is very good at that. So in terms of I think of what Manly do, where they take Trbojevic to run on the fourth tackle and win the play the ball for the kick, which then Cherry Evans takes and hits the floor. Or similarly, the amount of running that Tedesco does that is more. I'm not saying Dylan just doesn't do the tough stuff because obviously he does. He's a very good player, but he's just not quite as good as those players. Anyway, that was my sacred cow. I think that's the first. I think we're on episode 11, and that's the first hot take.
Yes, I'm a little bit more. I sort of swing to and fro on whether I think Dylan Edwards is overrated or underrated. I think there's a lot of stuff that he does really well, and there's probably some stuff he doesn't do as well. But the team around him covers that. As said, whether he should be New South Wales fullback, I think they pick Tedesco, and that's probably at least for game one is what they'll do. But yeah, I mean, it's a good case of why statistics in isolation without any context that there's little value in it. That context and insight is really what drives it. So yeah, as you said, you can see how many meters Dylan Edwards runs, but you also got to look at, as you mentioned, how many times he does it, where he's getting the ball, why he's getting the ball so often, and what situation he's getting it in. Because he's clearly getting better positions to run in. That doesn't say he doesn't convert from a lot of those situations into tries, and he's excellent backing up some of those Panthers forwards and edge players. But he's getting the opportunities that probably some other players aren't. And again, that's not to talk down his ability, but he's getting some really good opportunities.
Yeah, I wrote an article on this, and I think the phraseology I used is imagine what numbers Tedesco and Trbojevic would get if they played fullback for the Panthers. Yeah, well,
I mean, I was thinking of one today is that I was thinking, imagine the numbers that David Fifita might generate playing for the Panthers. He's already doing what he's doing at the Titans, where he has little to no support, put in very difficult situations, and even like last year where he was not even starting games. Imagine, on an edge for 60 to 80 minutes for the Panthers, you could write some new records with some of the way he plays.
Yeah, I will leave you with my favourite stat, which I like to work out for as long as here, and we have a clubhouse leader.
I've got a bonus one as well, so when you're done, I'll give you my bonus one.
Okay, this is the Tarek Sims Award. So Tarek Sims got to Origin in 2022 without making a pass. And so since then, I have tracked who is the last sort of regular player to make one pass in the whole year.
Yep.
And fittingly, is it the Panthers? Liam Henry has played, I think, 7 games. He has not passed the ball. It was Davey Moali he was last year's winner, I think. Yep. And there you go. One pass. I
think I checked that one a couple of years ago, and I think Royce Hunt at one point had not made a pass. I think he'd made a dummy half pass, but not a general pass. So once the ball cleared the ruck. So he would have been one of my guesses if you'd asked me who that might have been.
I think I like to keep the Trbojevic number of how long can you go without making without how many runs can one take directly into defenders without beating one of them, and that's I think Jakey is still. He's actually made a line break this. He's made a line break this year.
Yeah, he made it against.
Of course, the beautiful Barbarians. You can put that on the side so bad. Yeah. The middle defense is so bad. Jake Trbojevic made a line break.
The same thing happened in the Cowboys-Dolphins game this week. The Cowboys in the middle of the field just let Mark Nichols waltz through. I don't think anyone got within 2 meters of him. I don't understand how that happens. Do you want to get to my bonus stat?
I was going to say, we've got an hour and 15 minutes into this podcast without mentioning how rubbish missed tackles are, because neither of them had a missed tackle. So we already denigrated one stat with completion rate. We'll save the other ones we don't believe in. Oh no, we've done run meters, completion rates, and missed tackles here. So there you go.
I guess so. We can. Well, there's a few more we can go through. But anyway, so I've got as mentioned, I've got my player contribution rating that I talked about before that Isaiah Katoa was doing exceptionally well at. So as I said, correlates stats that do well with that contribute highly to winning and negatively as well. So things like missed tackles, try assists, try causes, line break causes, penalties conceded, errors, those sort of things contribute negatively, and tries, line breaks, tries, line breaks, run meters, that sort of stuff contribute positively. So there's one player this year who's the lowest player of the season, has the worst rating this year, and I will give you a hint in that he plays for South Sydney. So guess who the lowest player would be?
The most error-prone.
It's not necessarily error-prone, but the statistics that have been assigned to him, and I'm probably framing it in this way that you might actually guess who it is. The statistics that have been assigned to him are more negative than positive. And I think, again, I'll caution this in that this is more of a player impact rating than a player talent rating. So it gauges the impact they had in a particular game. And so if they've had a lot of bad statistics, it will possibly sound worse than they are as a player. But so there's one South player who's a last, and I'm just going to see if you can guess.
I've got two guesses. One of them's, I think if it's a hot take, it's this guy. And the other one is just who I think it might be. I would say if it's a hot take, Cody Walker.
Close.
Isaiah.
He's down there. He's down there. No, it's not Isaiah Tass either. I'll give you one more. No, he's not Cameron Murray. He was actually a back, and it's Jack Whiten.
Jack Whiten. Is it because the reason I said Cody Walker is because I think he's been bad per se. So I think he would try lots of stuff and it hasn't come off, which would negatively. It would look like he hadn't. If you throw 5 passes over the sideline as he did against the Roosters, you only take 2 of them, get caught by somebody else, and you look great suddenly.
I think what my reading of it is, and I sort of was trying to hint at this before, is that he's probably having to make up defensively for some of the issues around him. And so instead of him being the one, so I think there's a contentious issue, and I've actually spoken to a couple of people at some clubs about this, and there's a contentious issue with try causes and line break causes, and as in who was directly allowing those things to happen. And often it'll be because of a misread further in the field or a bad someone in bad positioning that and then ends up sort of snowballing into a wide gap on an edge. And so those edge players generally will tend to get given some of these defensive lapses that were not necessarily their cause, but they're the ones that are trying to save it. And so I think that's the issue with Jack, as he's been in a few situations, where players inside of him or outside of him have made poor reads or not put in a lot of effort, and he's trying to save whatever was left. And so unfortunately he's ended up with a lot of these negative statistics. So he's ended up at the bottom of the competition at the moment. And that's also why I mentioned it's more of a player impact rating than a player talent metric. Because we all know Jack's got plenty of talent, but he's had some been put in some poor situations with South this year.
Yeah, that would be a great. That's one for another podcast. Is sort of the great intangibles of it, because I find it a lot, especially line break causes, try causes, whatever you want to call it, defensive read. Trying to get a read, if you will, on defensive reads is really hard, because a lot of the time there's guys I always use him as the example, but Brian Kelly, who's been doing it for 150 games, have not been able to tackle, consistently getting it wrong. And then there's guys I always think of the night that Morgan Harper got rinsed by Talakai. I reckon one of the 4 tries he conceded might have been his fault, and the other 3 was structurally. Him being left alone against the rampant big guy who had a fight.
Yeah, what do you expect him to do?
What's he meant to do with this dude?
You meant to put players in positions to succeed. You don't want to put him in positions where they're most certainly going to fail, and putting him up 1-on-1 against Talakai is not a good situation.
Yeah,
talking about just, and this will be the last thing, I'll let you wrap up, but that's something that I really focus on as well. And one of the ones that I've noticed in the last couple of years is I remember the Broncos' edge with Brodie Croft and Katoni Staggs used to be notoriously bad defensively, and there'd be a lot of points and breaks conceded through there. But if you look at Katoni Staggs where he is now, he's defensively significantly improved in the last couple of years. So it's again, it speaks to defense not necessarily being a talent issue. It's more of a application, attitude, effort issue.
Yeah, and you can leave. I know that we've mentioned on this podcast before, most tries happen in the centres. What I would
exactly.
So it just makes centres look bad when very rarely is actually.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it is their fault, but a lot of the time it's not. On that note, I'm going to leave it because I know it's the middle of a work day for you, and it's actually my day off when I do these podcasts for fun with you, because it's role. So I'd say, firstly, if you like this, subscribe. Obviously, read Rugby League Eye Test. It's brilliant. Read it every single week, and follow Rugby League at League Eye Test on Twitter or League ET. I can't remember. You remember you're on Twitter?
Yeah. At League Eye Test on all of your favorite or least favorite social media platforms. And then websites, www.rugbyleagueeyetest.com. And just want to thank you before you wrap up, Mike, for bringing me on the show. I've been listening to the podcast and it's sensational. It's the sort of the rugby league podcast that I want to listen to. And not a lot of drama, not a lot of contract talks and signing talks. It's just talking about the game and not only on the field but off the field, that interesting topics that you don't see talked about elsewhere. And
if you'd like to leave a comment like that in a review, apparently that helps. So please tell people about it, leave reviews, share, like, subscribe, and of course, stop talking about completion rates, try assists, missed tackles, and things, because I just, I got a response to that in the comment section. I'm not a big enough man to ignore it. On that note, thanks for the Rugby League Eye Test, and keep watching those skies.